In today's video, we will be discussing probability and statistics again. We're going to continue our discussion about sampling. But before we do that, we will go over some of the assignments that are due over the next week. The first assignment that's due would be the Module 5 My Math Lab homework and the Module 5 My Math Lab quiz. Those are both due by November 16th, 2021. And then the next group of assignments would be the Module 5 Portfolio Project, Part 5 of the Student Loan Project. That would be due by November 19th, 2021. In our previous discussion, we talked about the different methods used to calculate data by using sampling. We talked about 5 different sampling methods. The first being the convenience sampling, which is generally more biased. And we talked about that in our last class discussion, where we talked about whether at a sporting event, whether athletes versus spectators get injured more. Well, our class is generally, we have more student athletes. So that study or that sample was was biased more towards the athlete saying yes, they get injured more. But this doesn't take into account the spectators that sometimes get into fights, or sometimes while they're walking up and down the aisle to get to their seat, they may stumble or trip. It doesn't take into account of any type of choking hazards while they're eating or drinking. So that convenience sample that we did in class last week, since we do have the majority athletes in our class, more athletes said that at sporting events, athletes get injured more than spectators. The second type of sampling method we discussed was cluster sampling. And this is also referred to as an area sample because it takes geographic areas. We talked about the case with Aaron Brockovich and how citizens of a particular community that was close to some contaminated water, they were more prone to cancer. The third thing we discussed was stratified sampling, and that involves dividing the population up into different characteristics, whether it was gender, race, religion. But in our case, we use majors, and then we also use what year the student was in. The fourth thing we did was random sampling, and we did a raffle at the end of the class where we had the 4 majors that were in our class. We put them in a hat, one entry per major, and whichever major was selected, they got some candy or a snack out of the vending machine. Today, we're going to talk about systematic sampling in class, where we're going to figure out the cost of, we're going to figure out which major has the most expensive books. And we're going to draw it by doing every nth of student. What I also want to do is work on the spreadsheet that we had last week. Again, this is what we did last week in class, where each student gave their response to the survey that was given. And sampling is pretty much doing a survey. And that's what we were doing when I was going around class asking each student certain questions as it related to the different columns that we have in here. What I want to do is I want to enhance this spreadsheet, and I want to put our study, I want to have a graphical representation of the study that we did, the sample that we did last week. But before I do that, I want to enhance it by, I want to change this math majors. I want to make the font a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go to my home tab, my font group, and then I'm going to go to the font size, and I'm going to make it an even 25. So I'm going to type 25 in here. And then the next thing I want to do, I want to merge this title field from the A column all the way to the F column. So I'm highlighting that. I'm going to go to my home directory, my alignment group, and then I'm going to select merge and center. That way it takes up the whole first row between A1 to F1. All right, so the next thing we're going to discuss is how can we make a graphical representation of the data that we collected during our sample or our survey. We don't have any numbers on here, but there is something called a pivot table that allows you to turn data sometimes into graphical representations. In order to get a pivot table, we want to select all of the things that we want to put in the pivot table. And we can select this quick analysis tool right here, or we can go to the insert tab and we can actually do a pivot chart, or we can do a pivot chart and a pivot table. I'm going to select the quick analysis tab because I want to do it a couple of different ways. I want to change the data a little bit, manipulate the data a little bit more. So I'm going to select tables and I'm going to select pivot table. So as I'm highlighting this, you see that it says count of last name by major, count of last name by year. And as you can see, as I'm highlighting or hovering over the tables, it's giving you a preview of what it's going to look like. This is count of last name by college helps, career, and student athlete. This is count of last name by year and student athlete. And then you have more options. I'm going to just do the count of last name by major. So when I do that, it puts a new worksheet down at the bottom. And I want to actually, since I have multiple worksheets, I'm going to change this to reflect what is on this worksheet. So it's not just sheet 1 or sheet 2 or sheet 3. So what's on here, I'm just going to say that this is MATH201 sample. And actually, I could put the type of sample that's in here, which is a stratified sample. And then I'm going to change this sheet 3. And the way that you change it, you go down to the worksheet. You can either double click on the worksheet tab, or you can right mouse click on the worksheet tab and select rename. And I'm going to name this pivot table for major or based off major. Some other things I'm going to change where it says row labels. I'm going to change that to majors. And the way I'm doing it, I'm just double clicking on the field. Another way to do it is to click on the field, go to pivot table, and then in the active field group, select field settings, or you can just double click and you get the same thing. And this is going to be the count of majors, or the sum of majors. That's what I'm going to name it. Now I have it broken down based by major, and I have the total and the grand total here. What I can do from here, I could either move some things around. I can add some new fields. So I can add the year, and you see it adds the year. If I want to put the student athlete, I can put that in there. But I just want to keep it as the majors and the sum of the majors. Once I get that, I can go up to my pivot table analyze tab, go to my tools group, and I can select pivot chart. This gives me a group, a bunch of different charts that I can represent the data that we collected in our sample size. The ones that are normally used would be like the pie chart, the column chart, and sometimes the bar chart. I'm going to do the pie chart for this example. We click pie, and you see that it has a legend over here. It has a pie chart and it's broken down by different majors. If I hover over it, over the different shades or the different sections, I see that this one's for the healthcare major. This is for the business. This is for criminal justice. And this is for social service. In addition to that, I also see what the value is for social service. I see that that's one, and that represents 6% of the total majors that we have in our class. The next thing, business, again, it has a count of seven, and that's 44%. Healthcare, the value is six, 38% of the class majors. And then we have two for criminal justice, which is 13%. Now I can add different labels by clicking on the chart elements, going to the data label, and I can select different ways I want to present it. I'm gonna select data call out because that allows me to see the different majors and the percentage that's based off of. Another thing I'm gonna change, I'm gonna move this up a little bit right to the right of the chart or the pivot table. And I can change the title. I can change the title by double clicking on it, or I can go into pivot table. Let's see, field list. Nope. I usually just double click on it. It should be selected. I'm just going to double click on it. See what else is. Yeah, we're going to change that. There it is. And we're going to go to the pivot chart format tab, and in the current selection, I can select what I want to change by doing it here, but I usually just double click on things, and we're going to make this a little bit wider. Let's see, this is going to be, we're going to change this, just make this majors. That'll be the chart name. And let's move this up a little bit and make this a little bit wider. The next thing I want to change is how this looks. I don't like it looks too plain. So I'm going to go up to the pivot chart design and go to the chart styles group. And I'm going to click on the more button here. And this is all the different ways that you can change the chart style. I generally like the darker chart styles. I like the shade and the dark, but you can select any one that you want to select. It's up to you. All right. And then one last thing I want to do is if you wanted one of these chart entries to be out by itself, you could double click the whatever you want. And in the format data area, you have different options, which I won't go through each one. I just want to show you the one that allows us to separate the business major from the whole pie chart. You go to the point explosion option, and you can either move this here and it'll take it out, or I'll just put in 15% to see how that looks. Hit enter, and that's a little bit better. It's a little bit too far off, so I'll do 10%. So you see that separates it and it brings it out on its own. And the way you do that, you just click on the different items. You see these little circles, those kind of let you know which major that you're selecting. So right now I have the healthcare selected. If I wanted to select the social service, I just click on it and you see you have those three dots representing that I have that selected. If I wanted criminal justice and I wanted to explode that out, I could do that by clicking on it and you see it has the three dots around it. That's one of the charts that you can make. Now, another chart, like I said, it's different charts that you can use. But when you click outside of the pivot table, you see that that pivot chart tab goes away. But once you click somewhere inside of it, you see pivot table analyze. If I wanted to make another chart, all I need to do is click inside of the table, and then it gives me that pivot table analyze and pivot table design tabs. I'm going to make one more chart, but I'm going to create a new worksheet for that chart. So I have it selected. I have the pivot table selected. I go to pivot table analyze tab. I go to my tools group. I go to the pivot chart ribbon, and I want to make, let's do a column chart. All right, but again, I said that I wanted to put it on a separate worksheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the pivot chart design tab. I'm going to go to my location group and click on move chart. And this is where I can specify where I want to put it at inside the current worksheet, or I can put it inside a new worksheet. And I want to make this, the name of this is going to be pivot chart by major. Now I have a new worksheet called pivot chart by major, and I think I'm going to change this to pivot table by major. Major. That sounds a little more professional. And again, once I select outside of the pivot chart, I don't have that pivot chart tab up there. But once I click inside of it, I have pivot chart analyze, pivot chart design, pivot chart format. I'm going to go into the design tab, and I'm going to change the chart style to style number 5. And then I can also change the color scheme. I'll do gray. And then again, I can go to my chart elements. I could create titles for the different axes. And if I wanted to do data labels, I can do data call out. Again, data call out. I usually like to use the data call out because it allows me to see what it is and then the numbers beside it. I can do all types of things, a trend line, just so many things that you can do with pivot tables and pivot charts. But this is how it's basically we represent the data that we did with our stratified sample. Now we're going to do another real world explanation or talk about how sampling is used in the real world. We're going to use unemployment. This is a big number that always comes out every month. The way that this is calculated is the United States takes the data from all of the businesses about how they're hiring or firing and what they're doing, as well as they call around 60,000 Americans every month to get an idea of their employment status and also get other information from them. And they call the adult population. Now, when they talk about the adult population, they're talking about people from 16 years old and up. And they break the people that they talk to, they break them up into 3 groups. They break them up into the employed group, the unemployed group, and then the not in the labor force group. The employed group are the people who are employed or they work full time or part time as paid employees. They work in their own business or they're unpaid in their family business. That also includes people who are temporarily absent because of vacation, illness, or some type of weather or weather related incident where they can't get to work. The second group is the unemployed group. Those are the people who are not working full time or part time, but they're available to work, they're looking for work, or they're laid off. The third group is the not in the labor force. These are the people who are not employed or unemployed. They're full-time students or sometimes part-time students, homemakers or domestic engineers, retirees, or the people who want to work but they stop looking for work, the discouraged workers. Now, when we calculate the unemployment rate and the labor force participation rate, we use different calculations. To calculate the labor force, we use a total number of employed people plus the total number of unemployed people. And we'll do an example in the next slide. The unemployment rate is calculated by taking the number of unemployed people divided by the total labor force and then multiplying that number by 100. And then to calculate the labor force participation rate, we take the labor force, divide that by the adult population. Again, everybody 16 years old and over. And then we multiply that by 100. Here's an example. Well, this is an example that we're going to do. This is the labor statistics from January of 2016. And we see that we have 150.5 million people that are employed. We have 7.8 million unemployed, and then the people that are not in the labor force for whatever reason, 94.1 million. And then, well, we're going to calculate the labor force, we're going to calculate the unemployment rate, and we're going to calculate the labor force participation rate. To start off, we're going to calculate the labor force. Yeah, that looks good. Labor force. And to calculate that, we take that's equal to number of employed plus the number of unemployed. And that gives us our labor force. And I think I'll just write labor force up here. Looking at the statistics from January 2016, we see that there's 150.5 million employed and 7.8 million unemployed. And if we do, let me erase that and make it look a little bit better. Oh, excuse me, put the wrong thing. 150.5 million. We do our addition, so plus, that's 13, carry to 1, 1 plus 0 is 1, 1 plus 7 is 8, 5. So our labor force is 158.3 million people. So let's see, and that's right here. That represents that number. That's how we got that number. Next thing we're going to calculate is the unemployment rate. To calculate the unemployment rate, we take, so I'm going to write unemployment rate. We take the number of unemployed, which is 7.8 million, and we divide that by the labor force, which is 158.3, and then we multiply that times 100. I'm going to open up my calculator, and we have 7.8 million unemployed. I'm going to divide that by the labor force, which is 158.3. That gives me about 0.4927. I'm going to multiply that number times 100 to get my percentage, and it comes out to be 4.9%. We'll just take the two numbers there. So this would equal 4.9%. The next thing we're going to calculate is the LFPR, the labor force participation, yeah, participation rate. And to do that, we take the labor force, total labor force, divide that by the adult population, and then we multiply that by 100. Now, the labor force is 1.5, well, 1 point or 158.3 million people, and the adult population, which takes in effect the people that are not in the labor force, the unemployed, and the employed, that's 252.4 million, and then we're going to multiply that times 100. I'm going to open up my calculator again. We have 158.3 million. We're going to divide that by 252.4 million, and then we're going to multiply that by 100. And that comes up to 62.7%. That number equals 62.7%. That's how we come up with the labor force participation rate, or the LFPR. Now, I did mention that the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics, that's where all of the data about unemployment, inflation, all types of economic indicators, that's where it's calculated and that's where it's placed at. I'm going to show you how to get to it, and then we'll look at one of the, well, how it compares from that January 2016 to how that unemployment rate compares to the October 2021. So I already have Bureau of Labor Statistics. I was already checking it. So the website is www.bls.gov. Once I go there, I'm going to go to the economic releases. I want to see the unemployment rate. More importantly, I want to look at the monthly employment rate. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to go to the employment situation, and I'm going to go to employment situation summary. And this pretty much gives me all of the data that was calculated, how it was calculated, who was included. It gives me the breakdown of the unemployment rate, the labor force, participation rate, who wants a job, who doesn't want a job. It breaks it down by gender, it breaks it down by race, it breaks it down by different industries where people are employed. So I see here that at the top, I want to look at when it was released. So we see it was released on Friday, November 5th, 2021 at 8:30 a.m. And it says that total non-farm payroll employment rose 531,000 in October, and the unemployment rate edged down zero point 0.2 percentage points to 4.6%. So the unemployment rate for October 21 or 2021 is 4.6%. We had 4.9% for the unemployment rate back in January of 2016. And again, it breaks it down. It says household survey data. That's the sample that was taken. It was a stratified sample because it breaks it down by race, gender, and age. But you see that the adult men, you see what their unemployment rate is. Somewhere in here, the labor force participation rate is 61.6. We had 62.7 in January 2016. The number of persons employed part-time, 4.4 million. Number of persons not in labor force who currently want a job. And then you have people who don't want a job. So it breaks it down based off of different characteristics of the person that they're calling the survey. This is where the 60,000 usually comes into play, or it adds to the sample that's done. Again, sampling allows you to get a broader idea of the different characteristics of a certain population. When we're talking about unemployment or employment rates, we want to get an idea of who's employed, who's not employed, who doesn't want to be employed. And then we want to break it down by different characteristics to see how the different groups are doing based off of the employment climate or the employment environment. We'll discuss a little bit more of this in class, but I did want to show you how sampling is used in the real world and how you're using addition, subtraction, percentages, division. You're using all types of things that we talked about in math to base or to get an idea on the employment situation that we have going on. So the last thing you have to do is your journal entry, like we do every week. What'd you learn? Is there anything that you need me to review for next week's class? Has to be at least 50 words. And the subject line, just make sure you put Math 201, today's date, and that it's the journal entry.